decided not to do a presentation with an overhead just because I want to look at people's eyes and I want to have engagement. So make sure that you have something to write things down on. And if I have points that are salient, I'll try to make sure that you get the outline of the notes that I'm giving you. But let's begin actually with a prayer for bravery. And this work is difficult. And I recognize that many of us have different personalities, some of which we call introverted. I am not an introvert. I feel very comfortable with people, and I get my energy from other people. But I know a lot of us, when I start talking about evangelism,
This could go in your pocket.
oh, okay. I have a hate-hate relationship with microphones. All right.
Oh, that'll work.
All right. Okay. So, I understand that there is a frustration that I served in a church that was full of introverts. It was almost 100% introverted. And so it was difficult. I remember I would take them and say, let's walk the neighborhood and say hello to our neighbors. We'd have this wonderful jazz concert that we wanted to share with them. It wasn't even church. It was a jazz concert. And let's knock on the doors and say, there's a free jazz concert with a wine tasting afterwards. Isn't that fantastic? And no one would show up because they were so scared to knock on the doors and say hello to the neighbors. And I get that. And I think as I've grown in my ministry, I've realized that there are many different skills and charisms of people in the community, and you have to respond to them and know the church that you are, the specific genome of the church that you're serving, and know how to take that genome and make that be a kind of church that can serve a neighborhood. So when I'm praying for bravery, I'm praying for you to push yourself a little bit beyond where you are maybe, but knowing who you are and not stepping outside into someone else's personality. So as I'm praying this, imagine the thing that you're the most scared of and the thing that you'd like to conquer, and breathe the Holy Spirit into that scary, empty, vacuous space, and allow God to transform that. And you know what it is for you, so let's pray. When the light around you lessens and your thoughts darken until your body feels fear turn cold as a stone inside, when you find yourself bereft of any belief in yourself, and all you unknowingly leaned on has fallen, when one voice commands your whole heart and it is raven dark, steady yourself and see that it is your own thinking that darkens your world. Search and you will find a diamond thought of light. Know that you are not alone, and that this darkness has purpose. Gradually, it will school your eyes to find the one gift your life requires, hidden within this night corner. Invoke the learning of every suffering you have suffered. Close your eyes. Gather all the kindling about your heart. Create one spark. That is all you need to nourish the flame that will cleanse the dark of its weight of festered fear. A new confidence will come alive to urge you toward higher ground, where your imagination will learn to engage difficultly as its most rewarding threshold. Amen? Amen. I've been called to talk about building a neighborhood church. And as my community, which we now call Church on the Square, was being born, we developed a tag phrase for what we wanted our church to be for the neighborhood of Canton, which is where we're serving. And it's church as the heart of the neighborhood. Church as the heart of a neighborhood. Oftentimes you'll hear people say, who would miss you if you were gone? Who would miss you? What would be the vacuum that was left in a space? Who would miss you in your church if you were gone? And I'd like to actually change that and make it even stronger. Who would be desperate to keep you to stay? Who would if you announced tomorrow that you're closing your doors, who would storm wherever they needed to storm, the bishop's office, and say, we will not lose this church because it means too much to this neighborhood? It's about developing a sense of rootedness in your neighborhood, that you're so important, you're keystone to the identity of that community, that if you were gone, there would be mourning because you're serving it so well. Think of Dorcas. Think of when she died and how everyone mourned because she served her neighborhood so well. How can you be the Dorcas of this neighborhood? How can you turn your life over to serving the neighborhood really, really well? And that's how I'd like us to imagine, not even who might just notice that you're gone, but who would feel transformed by your loss. There are three structures that, this is the outline for the conversation, okay? One is, first, listening to need. This is what I used in my community, listening to need, and that's the gift of time. The second one is connecting to their need. That's the gift of love. And the third of the structure is facilitating solutions. I use the word facilitating on purpose, and that's the gift of resources. So when I think of a neighborhood church, I think of these three things in succession and maybe in continuous succession, because you can't stop listening, but you get to step two and you're like, I'm not going to listen anymore. I think I've got everything pulled together. But continuing a value, a theology, a morality of listening as being what your church is. So our goals for today, and maybe I'll come back and be a part of you later on, but this is the very small goal that I'd like to set for ourselves today. To spark a curiosity about your parish and to set to exploring the needs that exist among your neighbors. Now this concept of parish, you guys know what a parish is, right? Parish is who this church, in the larger sense of the diocese, in the larger sense of the city, who this church is set to serve. You get to define it to some degree. I mean, you might say it's this neighborhood. You might say it's the neighborhood of the cathedral. But you can also, and I'm sure you've heard of churches that know specifically what their parish is. A church that I've always been impressed by is Trinity in South Chicago, the church where Obama used to worship. And their tagline is unashamedly Christian and unapologetically black. They know that they're there to serve the black people in the neighborhood, and white people are welcome to come anytime. It's incredibly welcoming. When I would go and worship there, I felt so at home. It was amazing. But they knew that their call was specific. And I think one of the dangers that we have at church is we try to cast our net too wide. And we don't know who we are, and therefore we start to serve everyone. And as soon as somebody walks in the door and they have, let's say, a particular need that we can't serve, and we know it, we know our facilities can't serve it, we know that our staffing can't serve it, but we say, oh, we're going to create a program just for you. And it's a program of one. So we have many programs of 1 or 2 or 5, instead of knowing who we are better and serving well. So the first thing to do is cast an idea of what your parish is, which encompasses the concept of what is your mission statement, what is your version of our tagline, which is church as the heart of a community. We have a larger mission statement that talks about stewardship of environmental justice, it talks about our LGBT community. I mean, we have that larger mission statement, which I can't rattle off because I don't know it as well as I know my tagline. But it's on our website. But we know what we're about. And every time that we do a partnership, every time that we reach out to the community, we know that we're doing something that is core to our mission and our values. And so that's the first part. I'm sure, have all of you gone through some sort of, like the 90s was all about mission statements. Did we have mission statements here in these churches? Yeah, I'm sure they're on the shelf collecting dust somewhere. It's okay. I mean, don't feel shame in that. Just know that that's who you were then, and maybe a truncated version of like, why are we here? Just have that conversation. What are we specifically good at? I mean, I hear here in this community, one of your pastors is an excellent chaplain, and she has a real heart for chaplaincy. So notice that skill and start watering that green spot, because that's where you're going to find your growth. Stop trying to water the things that are out in the brown. Try to know what you can do. Yeah. So, does that sound like a good goal for today? Is everybody on board? Yes, good. Okay. Can you tell me too, what communities are represented here? I see that the dean is here, and so is anybody else from the cathedral? Can you raise your hand? Oh, wonderful. Okay, good. And the ones from here in this community are wonderful. Is there anybody else that I'm from a different community that's not? Okay, all right. So that's good, because I did all my work for these two communities. The third community would be.
Where are you from?
Waukee.
From the western suburbs.
Okay.
They're tied trees.
Well, St. Timothy's, but
All right. Hopefully,
that's west.
it'll be useful, even though it's specifically for. I'll try my best to be useful. That'll be my my goal.
I didn't catch that.
I'll try my best to be useful for you. We'll see.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's fine.
You can tell me later.
Yeah.
All right, so
I'm trying to be useful.
for listening, this is our first of the three categories, listening. Philippians 2, 1 through 4. If then there is any encouragement in Christ, any consolation from love, any sharing in the Spirit, any compassion and sympathy, make my joy complete. Be of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others. Understand how that works for parish ministry? It's powerful. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit. This is difficult, guys. I mean, we as churches, we want nothing more than to grow and to be self-sufficient and to have the right makeup of pastors and to have the right programs. And so instead of thinking about how we can serve others, we try to say, let's create the kind of church that we want to look like and let's make that. And it just doesn't work. Every time I try to launch a program that is about my selfish conceit, it goes nowhere. But every time I listen to other people's needs, that program blossoms. I was talking to somebody about doing a church plant, and she said it was just organic down in Arkansas. She said it just was organic. It just happened. Because, it was not selfish conceit. It was about listening to what need was and responding to it. And this is why I think that this work, this neighborhood work, is incarnational. What did Christ do? Jesus Christ came down and listened. He knew us better so that God might know us better. And as we're called to ministry, we are called to do the same thing, to listen, to know our neighbors better so that they might know God better, right? Okay. This is one of my favorite songs. Ana Hernandez, does anybody know Ana Hernandez? She's a friend from way back, and I just saw her a couple weeks ago. But this is one of my favorite songs of hers, and it's based on an Arhati Roy book called God of Small Things. Has anybody read The God of Small Things? Oh, just a thick, viscous, fantastic, beautiful book. And the words are, another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. So I'm going to sing it to you first, and then you can join in with me. Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. She is on her way. Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. She is on her way. Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. She is on her way. Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. She is on her way. Even in incarnational ministry, it begins with love. The first step into loving a community, the first step into being with the community. I'd like to imagine that the way that Jesus understood how love began and how Mary understood that love began was in the ministry of Joseph. There's a beautiful poem by Madeline L'Engle called O Sapiencia. Does anybody know this poem? I'll read it for you. It was from Joseph first I learned of love. Like me he was dismayed. How easily he could have turned me from this house. But unafraid, he put me not away from him. O God sent angel, pray for him. Thus through his love was love obeyed. The child's first cry came like a bell, God's word aloud, God's word indeed. The angel spoke, So it befell, and Joseph with me in my need, O child whose father came from heaven, to you another gift was given, your earthly father chosen well. With Joseph, I was always warmed and cherished, even in the stable. I knew that I would not be harmed, and though above the angels swarmed, man's love it was that made me able to bear God's love, wild, formidable, to bear God's will through me performed. Gorgeous poem. So the church in Canton and Fells Point was first imagined by the Bishop of Maryland, Eugene Sutton, and the then Lutheran Bishop of Delaware and Maryland, Wolfgang Hertz Lane. There was a community in this neighborhood that was dying. It was a small Lutheran church. They were worshiping at about 7 people. And what they do is when everybody that they knew was supposed to be there had come, they'd lock the doors. You know? So, because they didn't want any of the riffraff coming in and using their bathroom, so they'd lock the doors. And so, and I would walk around with the pastor because I spent the first couple months with him, and he would literally shake his fists at people as they drive by too fast. And he just was so angry about the damn kids getting on his lawn. And it was such a frustration for him. He'd been there 30 years. In that heart of gold, he was a good person, but he was so tired. And it was so done. And it was time for something to be done, to move on. And God's grace gave them the bravery to just hand their keys over. At first, they were going to worship with us, and I think they realized that I was very different than what they were used to. And many of them were driving in from the county because really only about 2 or 3 people were actually from the neighborhood at that point. And so they were tired, and they wanted to find churches nearer to where they were, but they had held on long enough to hand over the resources to somebody else. So I came in from Detroit, is where I was from before, and I had been started a little community there called Lexarandi, and it was really blowing up and doing great. And my bishop had a difficult time understanding how to take that energy and put it into a church. I'd say, Bishop, give me keys to a church. This is huge. It's big. It's like, I just can't figure out how to do it. I was like, no, it's okay. But he didn't want to have it in this community, and it was fine. And he ended up working on something else. And instead, God gave an opportunity because I'd done a presentation at a conference that one of the diocesan executives had seen in Maryland, and they said, why don't we find someone like Jim, and my partner was John Rapolsky, my music partner. We should find something like that. And luckily someone in the diocese said, well, why don't we just ask Jim and John if they want to come here? And they did, and we did. And so I came with John and then another John. I had 2 Johns with me. And this was my launch team. We came into this community and we said, we can't just start worshiping because we have nobody. There was only one person from the previous church that came along with us. And so we knew that what that start would look like would be difficult. So we'd get together and pray every week. And I sat on so many bar stools, and I walked that neighborhood hard. And I specifically put myself in the middle of as many organizations as I could to learn what the neighborhood needed. Instead of assuming what it was, I wanted to learn what it needed. The first thing I did actually was this. I went around and said, in plain clothes, I didn't wear my collar, I said, hey, what do you know about this church on the square? Sometimes I'd be literally standing right next to it, and they'd be looking at it. And they said, what do you mean a church on the square? I said, do you know the church that exists here on Canton Square? Do you know what it's all about? They said, I think we've seen people outside of it before. Some people said, it's been closed for a couple of years. Some people said, I think that they only do weddings there. Some people knew that there was a very active AA meeting, a very huge AA meeting. And they said, I think it only has an AA meeting in it now. And all of them couldn't point to where it was, even when they were standing right next to it. It was making no impact in the community, which is a shame because back in the 90s and the 80s, it had been part of these big political fights. It had been part of saving the neighborhood from the city paving over the entire neighborhood with this big extension to the highway. Like they had been really instrumental in making this be an active, walking, vibrant neighborhood that it was today, but it had lost its focus. And so what I realized was, because I also heard at the same time, I heard about that church that didn't exist. And then I also heard about this guy named Scunny, who had died a couple of years before, and he owned a bar on the square, and he was the mayor of Canton. And he would give away free meals to homeless people. He was a real SOB. Nobody really liked him, but he was like cantankerous, and he got things done. And he had these big benefits that would give money to nonprofits. And he was just the kind of heart that was a little bit shady and a lot full of love that made this neighborhood what it was. And he died suddenly from an accident. And the neighborhood had lost the sense of whose its heart was. And I said, this neighborhood is in the market for a new heart. This neighborhood is in the market for somebody to come in and say, I'm going to help out as much as I can. And so we humbly decided that we were going to try to be an agency and a point of contact, this catalytic converter of energy that would say, if you need something, we can help. To that end, we decided to call ourselves Church on the Square because it's the only, we were thinking of really cute names, like really smart, interesting churchy names. And we thought, we keep on saying it's the Church on the Square. And that's what we decided was the right name for us. We were Lutheran and Episcopal, so we didn't put anything about our denomination. And people started coming that were Catholic, and people that had never been to church in their lives, and people that were looking for neighborhood, and people that were looking for family. And they found that this was their new home. And they came in different kinds of ways. We started looking at it like this. There's a concentric circle of how a church exists, right? The core group is maybe your leadership team. Maybe it's even that small. Maybe it's 5 to 7 people. And we bemoan this all the time. There's 7 people that do everything in every church, right? That's true. So instead of like bemoaning that reality, we say, that's the core, that's our nucleus. That sort of like holds us together. And then as we radiate out, people that worship with us. Then people that participate in programming that's developed by the church. Then people that participate in programming that is loved and sponsored by the church but isn't from the church. And then we have a neighborhood that utilizes our space in various ways. And we said, how can we love every ring in that particular organism? How do we look at all those aspects and say, how do we infuse the Holy Spirit and intentionality and our mission into all those expanding rings of influence? That's sort of what we did at the beginning, is make that decision. We had the benefit of some pretty amazing and transformational mentors. Phyllis Tickle was my mentor, and Brian McLaren, and a woman named Cameron Trimble, and they came around us when we needed it. And that reminds me of another thing, which is ask for help, and ask for help from exactly the person that you want to ask for help from. I did a cold email to Brian, and he responded. Phyllis was a connection from a friend, and she was my grandmother for a year before she passed. And so it's dream big enough that you are going to transform. It's about believing that you can do it, right? It's not that you're a small church in the middle of a neighborhood that has a dead-end street, and it's hard to get in here, and people notice us from the highway, but we don't know how to get here. It's not that. It's say, this is an enclave that will transform this entire neighborhood and the city and the state. That's what we're going to do, because God is greater than our efforts. So, I wonder if you could take a stab at it. How do you define your community? If you were to say, like, what is the thing? I've already been talking to some people around, so I know at least an inkling of what you might define it as. But let's start with this church here. What do you define? What is this church? Anybody want to try?
Talking to you guys.
Yeah. You can answer too to start it off, but yeah, I'm talking to this.
Small, and people who go here don't live in
Okay.
this Fairmount Park area.
Okay, try it from a positive perspective. So it's
We come from different places.
so but you come from different places maybe because you have historically been here, and it's a family church, and it's home. It's like a homecoming. Would that be an adequate statement?
This church was built because our original church was taken over by the state of Iowa Properties.
Okay, all right.
So we had to move.
Okay.
And this is where we moved to.
So it's maybe it's the campground that you go with your family every summer. It's it's a reunion. It is the concept of the body of Christ remembering itself. So I'm sort of trying to reframe the idea of small. It's family. It's home. It's where you feel you've gone through a health scare, and like, who do you want to be around your bedside? Your family. That's this church. So that's one of your skills. Okay, good. Is there another?
And I think we have surfaced, as we've talked about, that this church is very much one that has been and which supports the working class and poor.
That's great. So you have a heart for people that are struggling, maybe emotionally, maybe financially, but definitely spiritually. Does that feel good too? Okay. Other thoughts about what this church is?
I think we have a willingness to go out. Each of us have our own passions,
Yeah.
and I believe that depending on what they are and when they're available, we have individuals from this church that go out to the community, to be part of
Right.
the community.
So you have a church of disciples. It sounds like you have a church of disciples. You know, you have people that are willing to utilize their skill set to do active ministry. That's huge. I mean, Jesus' church was small. And he had one person that was a real pain in the butt.
Only one?
Yeah, he had one person that was betrayed him, but another person that was a real pain in the butt, Peter. So I mean, yeah, small is scary. My church in Michigan was Trinity, Holy Trinity, and we renamed ourselves Trinity in the Woods because they were back in this woods and they felt so defensive about the fact that they were stuck. This highway came through and cut off where there would have been a connection. It should have been a main street when they built the church, and then they decided to plow it over, and they had this weird little wooded area that was right abutted against a highway, and they felt like it was the worst of both worlds. And part of my goal with them when I first came there was saying, first of all, you're small but you're mighty, which is, I said, we're going to host an event within the first year that welcomes the entire diocese, and we did. And we couldn't tell the fire marshal because it was completely packed. Second of all, I said, we need to know and love our neighborhood. We can't have been here by accident. This whole story of we got hemmed in by the highway doesn't work. It's not of God. What it is that we are a spiritual retreat center. We're a place where people go and feel that are broken. And we looked around the church and we realized, yeah, we're all broken. We're kind of all licking our wounds. A lot of people came from other churches and they had been run out of those churches because they were frustrated with what was going on. They tried to speak out, or the leadership was terrible in some particular way, and they came and hobbled themselves into this little church. And the problem was they holed up there. And they closed the door and they started shivering in the corner. Instead of realizing that they had found this beautiful enclave, they'd found this amazing Narnia-like place that they could share with other people. And so it's just about shifting the perspective of what that was. Let's talk about the cathedral. All right, so yeah.
I'm going to say first because I'm fairly new and I don't have any historical perspective.
That's great, perfect.
So my perspective is that, and I call it a core competency, is music and worship.
Love it. Yeah, so you're a Center for the Arts. Yeah.
That's the way I see it.
Yeah, I think that's great. I've seen your space. You have a lot of opportunity for that there. How about other people that maybe have been there a little longer? Oh, sure, because you're not, that's right, okay. So she's saying that, say it again.
I said, since I'm new and have no historical perspective, my view of what our core competency is music and worship.
She's talking about the
Cathedral, so we're on the cathedral now, yeah, okay. Anybody else that maybe has been at the cathedral a little bit longer?
I've been there 24 years. I was young when I came. I was one of the young generation at that time.
I love it.
One of the things I think I value the most is the diversity, and some of that comes from being centrally located. We draw from all over, but I've got a breadth of church experience in my life, and so if you walk into a congregation where you don't fit the primary demographic, you don't feel at home. So if you go into a suburban congregation and it's mostly suburban families with children or whatever, you don't quite feel like you fit. Where we are, there's not really any specific demographic majority other than kind of educated and cultured. Mm-hmm. We would probably still not feel at home to somebody who walked in off the street. But, we've got a variety of ages, different kinds of sexuality and gender experiences, marital status, with or without children, a little bit of ethnic diversity, not a lot, but there's enough of spectrum that you don't have to walk in and feel I don't fit because nobody else here is
So
like
you're
me.
a patchwork quilt.
A little bit,
I like
yeah,
that. It's
yeah.
beautiful, okay. Anybody else that wants to say what your core identity is for the cathedral?
Well, we serve the community big time.
Yeah. And tell me how that happens. Tell me in what ways you serve the community. And if you can try to encapsulate it in like a value. Like, yeah.
It's a lot of where people maybe don't have a home otherwise. Like, the groups you witnessed last night, we have, I think, 5 different anonymous groups that use the building, and we feed 100 or more 5 days a week in the lower level of the
Yeah.
church. Besides the, things we do outside the church of different shelters and things like that.
I was imagining that would be the case with you guys. And maybe the challenge you have is what I call integration challenges, which is how do you get, that's the problem with a model church. It's the beauty of the model church, but the problem is that you can't integrate those different groups. And you get the problem that I was talking about before, which is you have communities of 3 people. And you have to find ways to have, a through line for all those things. And also, I will notice this, that on your calendar for the church, you didn't have your AA and your NA groups on that calendar.
You took the pictures.
Yeah, so I mean, it was it's not a shame thing, but like the fact is that a lot of times, and this was the case with my previous church, that there was an assumption that the AA group was altogether different, and we walk away, we look away, and let them have their thing. And what you realize when you start walking in there is that you, with your collar and the community, can find ways to serve. Maybe there's once every quarter that you do the refreshments for AA and say thank you for being here. Once every quarter, you come in and just present the mission of your church and say, I am so glad that you're part of this church. This is your church. And Trinity in the Woods, they called our church the church at the end of the road. And they had never met a pastor for 3 pastors. They'd never met anyone from the church. And so when I went to them, they were so elated to have me be there. And suddenly, they wanted me to do their marriages and their funerals. They wanted to really create a sacramental community. And a few of them came to worship, but that wasn't the point. They'd already been worshiping there. In fact, many of them had been members of that community for much longer than the people that were worshiping on Sunday morning. And acknowledging that church is happening all the way through the week, and that it's okay for the priest and the congregation to show up for that church and bless it within the confines of what they think anonymous might be. You can allow yourself to be a part of the celebration of that ministry. So that may be one of the challenges that you guys have, is the integration challenge. Yeah. So, okay. Anything else about mission statement? I don't want to gloss over people as we move on. Okay. So, listening. Where can you listen in your community? First of all, are you doing a good job at listening anywhere? Is anybody going out and listening? I don't want to, the dean's shaking his head, so I'm sure he's doing some listening. But where are you guys doing some listening in your neighborhood? To brag in the Lord is okay. Go ahead. Where are some of the places that you're doing some listening?
Well, you've seen where we're located, and we're surrounded by office buildings. So to get to where people hang out, you've got to go several blocks over to where the coffee shops.
Yeah, cool coffee shops too, yeah.
Right, so right now we have 2 morning prayers that we do in local coffee shops.
I love that.
Right? I get a lot of questions, but I don't have any people joining us, but we're visible.
Yeah.
So we have to go to the places. Most of these people are living in townhomes, condos, and apartments. And most of that is several blocks away from us. So we're trying to figure out, 2 blocks away is the art part. Do we have a pet blessing on our own space, which is perfect, or do we go to the art part?
That's good, yeah.
Migrate. So we're just trying to think creatively about, and most of the places that are around us are restaurants, coffee shops, bars, and businesses.
And for the sake of the conversation, and that's really good, I want to notice the difference. I asked you if you're listening, and you told me about programs.
Oh, okay, so listening
Okay, yeah.
is and people say, well, your guys got a collar on. Even when I don't have my collar on,
Yeah.
I invite people to church, I ask them what's going on in the community, I ask them what's important in their lives. And I ask people if they've ever heard of St. Paul's. And they always say, oh, you mean the big Roman Catholic one?
That's right.
2 blocks this way. blocks this way.
Yeah. You have to sort of claim a unique identity.
Yeah.
It's not to say that the other Catholic Church isn't fantastic, but
Yeah.
you have to be your own thing. So I have had the benefit.
I had an
Yeah.
experience this morning that the Perkins. I jumped out of bed at 8:52 this morning. Shoot, well, I'm supposed to be down here at 9:30. So I got ready quick, got into the car. It took me, and I got here about 9:30. Not a soul around. I looked at my time on the clock, and it said 8:30. I called my wife. I said, "Go upstairs and see what time it says up there." And she says, "Oh, 9:30." I said, "We're an hour early. I'm off to Perkins." So I went to Perkins. And they sat me in a place I'd never sat before, right between the host place and the kitchen, and right where the waitresses come and log in the meals. I heard a conversation about the inner workings of Perkins and the lives of those waitresses that I have never heard
That's
before.
perfect.
And it's all because of where they seated me.
It's funny. I was choosing between Perkins and walking the neighborhood, and I could have sat with you at Perkins. So yeah.
I just had talking about listening, I was just thinking, we have the cafe where we have people coming in every day. Our clergy and members of our congregation should be sitting in those meals with them and not being separate. It shouldn't be separate. We should be there with them and engaging
That's
in
exactly
conversation.
right. It was I ran a nonprofit in New York City before doing this work, and one of my jobs was inside of a church, again called Trinity. If you seem to be drawn to Trinities, Holy Trinity in the Upper East Side in Spanish Harlem. And it was a beautiful church with lots of activity, and they were really engaged, and they had these great programs, and they'd actually had so many programs, they broke it off, and it was its own separate 501c3, and I was the executive director of that. And so when we had feeding programs for the people experiencing homelessness in the neighborhood, members of the community would be some of the volunteers that would come and volunteer to do the feeding program. I could not get them to sit with their guests to save my life. They would huddle in the kitchen and feel separate. I said, "You guys, this is not going to work. It just doesn't work unless you love them. It doesn't work unless you sit with them." And so I would constantly push people to sit them down. I'd walk them over and sit them down and say, "This is Paul. Have you met Paul yet?" And I try to connect people. But I think one of the difficulties is, again, this integration thing, which is it's hard to break the patterns of separation that we have in church, and it is actually against what Christ thinks that church can be. Yeah.
I go usually a couple times, 3 or 4 times a year to Trinity, and we have a meal. And when I sit with the people, I'm thinking of one time in particular, I was amazed because they were interested in a service. They found out I was a priest, and their questions were, "Do you have transportation? How can we get to your place?" Because we were in a place where people could walk to it, but when they found out where I was, so that was amazing to me. In 15 minutes, I had maybe 8 or 10 people asking, "How do we?"
That's a perfect example. That's exactly it. Understanding that need and then figuring out a way to respond to it. Especially when there's enough people that's something that you say, God has called us to do this work. Then you find out how to buy a church bus. It suddenly focuses your energy and say, this is what we're supposed to be doing. And that's how churches come alive.
Or you send out a volunteer.
And then they build relationship. And they take them out for dinner afterwards. It's amazing what you can have happen if you just coordinate the thing that you need to do. Yeah, exactly. A driving ministry. That's wonderful. Okay. So I was lucky in my neighborhood because there is a Facebook group that has more people on the Facebook group than actually live in my neighborhood. So it is a very integrated group. It is a very integral group to what's happening in the neighborhood. And I submitted myself to be an administrator and a moderator on the group, and it's almost like celebrity status to be a moderator on this group because everybody hates you. And because we're constantly engaged in the conversation of what's happening in the neighborhood. I know how racist my neighborhood is because it happens on Facebook. And I have conversations with those people that put terribly inappropriate, violent things on Facebook. And it gets to be this pastoral ministry that I have. Whenever somebody's really difficult, the other administrators are like, Jim, deal with this person. And I've had some very interesting tear-filled phone calls with people that are living a rage-filled life that live in my neighborhood. And I wouldn't get those opportunities if it wasn't for finding the place of integration and connection that people are already using. Don't reinvent the wheel. This is a more connected generation and a more connected world than we've ever had. People are having conversations already. And I've done a little research, so I'm going to tell you where in your community there's low-hanging fruit. First of all, Nextdoor is a really great resource. If you're not on Nextdoor, you should be. And there's a Nextdoor for both your community and the one here in St. Mark's. There is easy access to census data that's on your city's website for Des Moines, and they will give you all you need to know about who to talk to. So St. Mark's, I found out, is about 5,017 residents that are in this neighborhood, and their average age is 45, and it's predominantly homeowners. So people are digging into this community. So if you are coming in from other neighborhoods, know this neighborhood is an established one that people are here and they are committed to being. Some of them have been here for a long time. And so my question would first be, and if I were here, what I would do is, and just sort of a brief survey of the things that are existing here, as I looked at Capitol Hill Christian Church, how do you develop a relationship with them? In what way are they doing ministry? Sometimes it doesn't work. I was doing the very same thing in Baltimore, and a new church plant came up beside us, and I said, I'd love to help you guys out. And they said, well, I don't think God's called us to be a part of your ministry because you support LGBT folk. And I said, okay, all right, we're here when the Spirit changes your mind. But sometimes it doesn't work. But oftentimes people will come around you and you'll find that the core gospel is a way for you to find, shared value and interest. And definitely Prince of Peace Lutheran is really close by here and could be a resource and a shared ministry partner. Have you ever done any programs with Garden Elementary? This is a great story about my church, Trinity in the Woods. So they had been going, for about 15 years, they've been going to this feeding program on Saturdays, one Saturday a month, where they'd feed hot dog breakfast, which I hated hot dog. For some reason, that concept was so awful to me. At a maybe an hour and 15-minute away feeding program. And I said to them, okay, I know that those people need care. But this feeding program, this organization is calling me and saying that we're sending 3 people and we should be sending 15, and that they have other organizations that want to step into our slot. We have a prime slot. We need to let go of that ministry because we're not doing it well. And they put, anonymous people put pamphlets on my desk saying that, this community has need. And I was like, I'm not contesting that this community has need. And I've been guaranteed that there's other organizations that will come in and take over where we are. But right next to us, there's an elementary school, and it is the funnel elementary school, the drop-off point for all people that don't speak English, so ESL students. And these are all immigrant families that come to Detroit suburbs for the first time, and they come to this one elementary school that is literally 17 steps outside of our church, and we've never been there. This is a problem. And so I said, I love you guys, and I love that you want to help out different people that are in need, but let's not travel an hour and 15 minutes away. Let's travel 17 steps. And so what they ended up doing is building a relationship and mentoring capacity, and the kids could come over and they had a relationship with this elementary school. And it wasn't for the benefit of anything but to love these kids that were in need. And they wouldn't have figured that out if they didn't do the work. And so we started getting, they'd send us like art projects, and we put them up in our worship, and we did the bags for the going back to school. We'd stuff bags with resources. So that kind of thing was a low-hanging fruit that they hadn't noticed because it was in their own backyard. And I guarantee you each of your congregations has that. Same thing with Goodrell Middle School. Fairmount Park seems to be a really fantastic place. Have you done worship in the park? What would it take to do worship in the park? Sometimes people are resistant. Sometimes you can do it renegade style, where you just go in there and do it, and then if somebody beats you off with a baseball bat, you can say sorry. The other thing that I did that was really effective was building relationships with the businesses on the square. Previously, the pastor had a relatively antagonistic relationship with some of them, not all of them, but some of them. And specifically because they'd have these big festivals where kids would come and they get really drunk and they'd vomit on stoops of people and they'd get all loud and rowdy. And I, instead of like condemning that before I had an interaction with people, I just went and said, I'm the new priest. I'd like to know what you guys are doing here. And I put myself on, even though I wasn't really supposed to be there, this hospitality committee and the small business committee of the square. And so I just said, I'm going to be the chaplain of this. And they had fights all the time, and it was great. So I could easily be the sort of the chaplain of those fights and respond to their sort of squabbles. And what it did then is, you're gonna laugh at this. When we have programs, I have literally had business owners complain to me because I haven't given them an opportunity to give me free food. To say, why didn't you ask me for free food? I would give resources that you could have a meal for your program. And so that's the kind of relationship you start developing, because the businesses realize that you are integral in the community and they're in the community and you guys can work together. And suddenly I would do our after worship meals at different businesses around the square. And they'd have a special reduced price for people from my community. And members of those bars started coming to church. And the owners of the bars started coming to church for different things. Sometimes for worship and sometimes for other things. So I would say Eastside Eddie's. I don't know if you have a relationship with them, but other small bars in the neighborhood, just figure them out. Walk in there with your collar on and say, hey, I'm here to care about you guys. We're expanding our ministry to see how we can change this growing neighborhood and be helpful. How can we do that? The library, we've had, one of the first meetings I had in Baltimore was with the head of all the libraries. Again, one of my cheeky moments, I just sort of call up like the mayor's office and I call up, the senator's office, and they say, I want to meet with somebody. And I called up the library and they sent me like the head of all the libraries in Baltimore. And she was really reticent about doing programs at our church because she was worried about the fact that it would be proselytization. They thought this is mixing church and state. And it took me a year, 2 years, and now they're doing all their programs from the church, the library right next to the church in our space that are bigger than 25 people. So, and that means people are coming into our church, and it's a value. And so now we're talking about collaborative programming. And so it's just about allowing yourself to know how that relationship works. I noticed that like one of the better real estate agents, Shane Torres, is celebrated in this neighborhood. And if you can get in the packet that they give to newcomers as they're moving into the neighborhood that has your information, a nice glossy about what's happening here, then they're your resource. And they like the fact that they're promoting a local church because people want to know that this is a family neighborhood. And you can say we have these programs for kids or for retirees or whatever it is, so that you know that particular person that's moving in knows that you exist. One of my friends in a neighborhood north of me has officially put himself as the greeter to all new people, and so he gets a ding when new people move into the neighborhood, and he brings them cookies. And so it's not that he's bringing people cookies that come to his church. He goes and brings them cookies when they first move into the neighborhood. And so sometimes he'll go over to his house and he'll have like 700 cookies out in his kitchen. So, do you know when the neighborhood association meets here?
It doesn't meet here anymore, it meets at Capitol Hill Christian.
Okay.
It's Fairmount Park Neighborhood Association started here
Okay.
as a result of a freeway project.
Yeah. Okay. And does anybody from the community go there?
It was sort of hijacked
Yeah.
from here because I belong to that. I'm one of the people that got it started.
Yeah.
It was sort of hijacked a few years ago and moved up there.
Is there a way that that there could be someone there, maybe even you, and sort of like bury the hatchet from that feeling of being hijacked? So it's the second Tuesday of every month.
See, I didn't even know what.
So second Tuesday at 6 p.m. at Capitol Hill Christian Church.
Second Tuesday, okay. 6 p.m.
And you can just show up. Yours is at 900 Mulberry Street on Second. Have you been there? Okay, good. Okay. And that's invaluable. Being in neighborhood community associations is really, really helpful because then you know where the energy is, and you can, when they say we're having a festival, say we'll sponsor that festival. We'll get ourselves a banner and put it out there. And suddenly people know that you care about festivals. It's simple. I mean, that's what low-hanging fruit's all about. The other thing that we've done is develop really close relationships with our city council person. Do you guys know your city council person? Linda? Okay. Linda Westergaard is her name? Yeah. And has
Skip
there,
Moore, I
Okay.
worked on Skip Moore's campaign.
yeah. And finding ways to integrate that kind of work with your church work is very important. And you are an invaluable resource to this church if you have those relationships already. That's very important. How about you guys?
I've met both of those
Yeah,
people,
yeah.
at Linda's house.
I've gotten to the point where the mayor's office and the councilman's office will call me if they need programs to be done or if they have a particular need in my neighborhood. I'm the first person that they'll call about people experiencing homelessness, about immigrant justice. I'm the first person that they'll call around LGBT rights and issues, and they send their staff members when they first start up to come meet with me because there's nobody else. It's not that I'm so amazing, it's that there's literally nobody else. And so if you fill that void, then you become a resource to them. And I was very careful when the council election came that I didn't endorse one of the candidates. I knew all of them, but I still held one of the mayoral candidate debates in our church, and I held a debate about the new transportation system that people wanted to put in, and people screamed at each other. And I held a conversation with the state's attorney about what's happening with violence in Baltimore. And so, yeah.
You're talking about all the things that you do as a priest, but how do you involve your membership?
I'll give a good example. Yeah, that's good. So my members are generally engaged already in their community, and they all have their own mission statement that moves them to do different things. Some of them do low-income housing loans as a couple. They've decided that's their ministry. And one that I'll talk to you about is a woman who runs a mentoring agency out of a small school nearby. And so she uses the church as a place to find the pool for mentors. And so she'll stand up and talk about how that's a ministry that she supports. Like I said before, if I listen to someone else's energy and help facilitate that energy, a program works. If I try to launch something on my own, it will not work. And so what I'm telling you as a priest, and maybe as a leader of the church, you create those avenues to have the conversation, to listen, but the programs that actually happen are not me. So all the programs I just mentioned were not sponsored by me. They were sponsored by the Department of Transportation, they were sponsored by the mayor's office, they were sponsored by a nonprofit that works in our space. I just allowed that and try to facilitate those conversations to happen. Because I've learned that if I'm the star, it doesn't work. Yeah. The same conversation to have with the cathedral. Average age is 40 in your area. It's all renters, not homeowners. Only 12% own. But that might change as these condos are being built. I mean, that might be a significant shift. One of the top interests in your neighborhood is volunteering. I mean, that's just pretty amazing that people are saying that's what they want to do. And so if you can be the place that they go to do volunteerism, then suddenly you're going to have an amazing step up. I'll go quickly because we have to keep on moving. But police contact has been super helpful for us, especially in Baltimore as it's going through a period of increased crime. So my neighborhood is a relatively affluent neighborhood, which is sometimes the victims of much of the crime that happens in the area. Petty crime mostly, but there's a sense that people are really nervous, yeah.
I was junior warden for a while, and as I was out mowing, I noticed that the police that patrol this area, they like to come to our parking lot to write up their reports or.
I love that.
But I haven't never figured out a set time that they do that.
Right.
But I kind of got to know them, and they got to know that, hey, she's around here, so she's okay.
Yeah, I like that. Finding out their name, like, knowing their beat cops is really important. I have it differently because I have places where people walk, the beat cops walk. I mean, maybe it's the same way in the cathedral area, but knowing who they are is
a little bit, because
yeah.
they actually stay in contact with us a little bit, and unfortunately, they've even had to, be present to make arrests and things like that, because they'll understand that a suspect is a frequent diner, for lunch or something like that. But so it's good to build those relationships.
mean, as you probably know, and maybe you know as well, there are people that that are down their luck and experiencing homelessness that you'll see over and over again. And sometimes they can integrate in your community, and sometimes they may have a substance abuse problem or a mental health issue that makes them a little more dangerous, or they need for their own care to be somewhere else. And so it's good to be in communication with the cops, so they don't arrest the people that are members of your community, and that they do sort of like know and are more cognizant and careful and caring to people that are in other need situations. So we've been, one gentleman has stolen from us, I think 3 times, and has been in and out of prison, and it's difficult to continue to do ministry with him, but I try. You know, so.
Well, and there's a, it's up on Euclid, I think Wedgwood Apartments.
Kids from there go to school down here at Garden.
Boy, I'm just thinking there'd be tremendous outreach opportunities up there, you know, with it.
I think it's pretty low income.
Oh, it is, and a lot of people fresh out of prison, or just helped a guy move in there a week or 2 ago. It's the first time he's had a bed or an apartment since prison. So.
There's also a big apartment complex up here with retired people living.
Yeah, we used to have.
My mother was one of the first residents there.
Stonecrest?
Yeah, Stonecrest.
Yeah.
But that's, you know, they have, that's strictly just apartments.
Yeah.
Individual apartments, there are no amenities there.
And that was one of the first things that when I walked by here, I thought, you know, and I heard that you guys have a real ministry for chaplaincy. If there's a way to be a chaplain to those organizations. There's also a new housing project that's going on right behind the Walgreens that just went in, and it's looks like it might be either low income or assisted income housing, and trying to find a way.
That's Wedgwood, that's not
Okay.
new.
Okay, newish, but I'm trying to find ways to build relationships with those housing complexes is really helpful too. You know, it takes some boldness to walk up to people and say, "Hey, we're here. Can we be of resource?" But like the senior living complex that is near us, we used to get baked goods, and we bring them over and just like spread out baked goods. And I know they're on fixed income, and so anything that we can do helps them out. And one of our members, to talk about how members can lead this, they decided to put in a little free pantry. And so that's where you can put like non-perishable items inside of a place where people can go and take things, and it's not shame-based, because they can go whenever they can go, and they take things out, and they can sort of supplement their cupboard with extra food if they're have food scarcity problems. So that they put it right actually next to the senior living center, because they knew that's where the need was, and it gets emptied every single week. People need it. So again, that's another thing that came from a personal, yeah.
I don't know if Deacon John talked to you about, and has the water giveaway program started up yet, or it's starting?
That's a cool idea, yeah.
Yeah, where we have the bus stop
Yeah.
right at, the bus stop right at the church, there, right at the corner. And, so in the hot weather we've been having, offering free bottled water with a label of St. Paul's on there, just handing it out. And I know we've not asked people to actually man the table, it's just kind of help yourself, but.
So that'd be the thing that's the growing edge, which is how do you create that to be a listening station
Yeah.
too? Maybe not all the time, but just like have someone that's there for half an hour, 45 minutes when it's at its peak, and just say, hey, tell me where you're going. Where do you guys work? You know, like how can we serve you better? And you'll learn such great data. Suddenly you'll, just like the conversation before about, you know, how do we get to church? How can we get transportation? Something will come up. It's amazing how it will. Probably within the first 2 weeks.
We have 3 or 4 other groups. We've got a recovery group, we've got an AA group, we've got a coin club that meets here, and we have a Russian Orthodox congregation who uses the building, but we don't have really that much interaction.
Yeah, so that's the next stage, is how you can integrate those things. That makes it's remembering that you're already doing good work. I think that's what I hope that you're hearing from the congregation that I served in Michigan, was they just had a chip on their shoulder thinking that they were failing. And they weren't failing. In fact, the bishop had told me, this church is going to die, and I won't blame you if it goes down. Which
Always on top of that.
that doesn't make sense. You know, and so I walked in there and it's like, this church isn't dying, this church is thriving. And it's just that nobody has reframed their story to say it the right way. You know, a friend of mine in New Jersey said, it is really hard to kill a church because the gospel is powerful. We are selling the most beautiful story about readjusting your perspective in the world that is filled with love. And it takes a real clever person to screw that up. And so, I mean, but I think that it's because of this failure of nerve and our fear that we've told our story that we're small and we're dying and we're pathetic and nobody wants to be next to us. It's a shame because God has given us so much, and don't we want to share it? All right, so the next thing is about connecting, and I think this is what I'm talking about, integration, connection. Philippians 2, 5 through 8. I realize that I'm low on time, but I'll try to get this next part in 10 minutes.
No, we can let Dennis go to 11, 12, 15.
All right, I'll get through this next section, and then for the next time we talk, I'll do the third section. And I'll provide the notes to the bishop so you can have that third section if you go to the other meeting. But connecting, Philippians 2, 5 through 8. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness, and being found in human form, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. We can sometimes get wrapped up in this concept of killing ourselves like Jesus. And the humility of Christ wasn't about asking us to step into that sacrifice. It's asking us to share the love first. The sacrifice comes when people react to it negatively, but that's not actually the goal. The goal is to share love. And if you notice what Jesus does is this incarnational theology. It means that we embrace the sense of the incarnation as the heart of the message of the gospel, is that we go into the world and we know and love them where they are. Think of ministries that go into recovery programs. Think of ministries that go into places into hospitals and hospice care. It's meeting people where they are and loving them there. If we can take that mentality and put it in all church ministry and growth, that allows us to embrace that incarnational theology everywhere we go. And we open up our heart to hearing Christ in them and not just trying to deliver some kind of programs or product that we think that they should come to in order to bolster our numbers. Does that make sense? This next song is another Ana Hernandez song, and I'll teach it to you. The first part goes, open my heart, open my heart. Do people know this one? Open my heart, open my heart. And then the bass part, or the lower alto part, is open my heart. Simple. Open my heart, open my heart, open my heart. So let's do the first part together, and then we'll add in the next one. Open my heart, 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 open my heart. Now strong voices, keep it. Open my heart, 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 open my heart. The citing by Lucy Shaw. Out of the shame of spittle, the scratch of dirt, he made an anointing. Oh, it was an agony. the gravel in the eye, the rude slime, the brittle clay baked on the lid. But with the hurt, light came leaping. In the shock and shine, abstracts took flesh and flew. Winged words like view and space, shape and shade and green and sky, bird and horizon and sun, turned real in a man's eye. Thus was truth given a face, and dark dispelled, and healing done. So after listening, you get to integrate that listening into who you are. Before you even do action, you just look around and notice who you are, and you are transformed by what you're seeing as the community begins to come alive. It's funny. I think that the seeds that we're planting now are just now beginning to sprout. It was the bishop that yesterday used an image that I really liked, and maybe the bishop could share his bamboo image again with us.
You know, we learned this last week. The speaker last week talked about and had a video about bamboo shoots, which I didn't know about bamboo shoots, but it sort of felt very appropriate. Apparently, a bamboo shoot comes from bamboo seeds. The bamboo seed goes into the ground and maybe there does nothing for 3 to 6 years, and all you may have to show for it is a little piece of grass, blade of grass might come up. And then all of a sudden, it gets into growth phase and grows 3 feet a day. 3 feet a day, it just shoots right up and becomes the tallest of the whole forest.
Yeah.
It spreads, it spreads, it
This
spreads.
is exactly how church works. Exactly. And so I think you'll find, as you saw in the church that was organic, it spreads and grows quickly. And so after a while, you realize that all you've got to do is hold on for dear life as projects and ideas come in, and you need to now suddenly figure out how to make those things into a codified idea of a church. Just this past year, we've been trying really hard to build a relationship with a Spanish-speaking congregation in Highlandtown. And we had our first ever meeting of our 2 congregations to get together. And I don't know if you've been following what's been in Iowa, is that ICE has had an uptick in activity in Baltimore. And right outside my son's school, one of the parents was picked up and taken away. Several of our restaurants have been raided. And the idea of this Anglo congregation coming up and being with them, and specifically this day that we came, the police came too, and wanted to talk to them about how they weren't ICE and that they would take care of them. Nobody showed up from that congregation, not one person. And it was a frustration. It was maybe a year ago. And I thought, we've ruined this chance. It's not going to happen. 3 weeks ago, the pastor called me and said, I've been working with the leadership here, and we want to try again. Can you come and preach for us in 2 weeks? So last week, I was able to go and preach at this beautiful church. And we did the translation because I can't speak Spanish. And so don't let that stop you. And together we were able to do an amazing service. And I think that what we're now imagining is what our new community can do together as far as building relationship. So sometimes it takes that long to make those things happen. Similarly, there's a process of saying goodbye that happens in listening, meaning you can't do programs. I talked about one at my church in Trinity in the Woods. Sometimes you are actually saying goodbye to people as they're being transformed by the process that's happening. And you have to not hold on really tight when you listen really well. The 2 leaders that came with me to Baltimore have since moved on, and it wasn't easy to lose them both. One of them went to seminary, and that was naturally where he needed to be. Another one went to another church, and that was naturally where he needed to be. And but it was a feeling of loss. And I think when you listen well, you start to hear the voice of God tell you to not be in a place that you thought you were supposed to be. And it is imperative for a church to understand the ebb and flow of that shift. As you know, in churches like this, that have lots of history, people that have been here since the 60s, it is hard to make adroit and fast change. It's hard. And so I think that part of this work will be administering to those people that are frustrated by change and are angry that it's going to happen, and loving them, and it's okay. And making sure that they're being attended to at the same time. But sometimes it's about, like I said, burying the hatchet about something that happened a couple years back that was a hurt. I mean, legitimately a hurt. But you have to move forward because God is calling you to serve this community. And if you are truly serving them, sometimes they'll break your heart. And God has given you a big enough heart to handle it. That's the tough thing. The other thing that I found out is that when you are present in community and listening, then suddenly become a priest for that neighborhood. And people that will never come into the church, and this will happen with the congregation too, because it has happened with my congregation, but I only know my story, is that they'll say, I need to talk to you as a priest. And I'll sit down with people and they will, at Church on the Square, I realized that people in their 20s and 30s have deep, deep pastoral needs. And I've been told stories that have shaken my core about people that are hurt. And if we don't know and hear those stories and present ourselves in listening and vulnerable postures to hear that, we'll never know they're hurt, and they'll never know that we care. I was with a group of young men, and I won't say much specifics about this, that were doing childcare in the neighborhood, and were amazing community leaders in their own right. And they had developed a church of sorts among themselves to specifically care for one of them that was in deep, deep distress, probably the most engaging and scary pastoral care moment of my career so far. But this group of young men, they weren't above 25, were so caring and so present with him that I was transformed by how church was happening in that room. They literally locked the door and they said, okay, this is a secret that we're going to tell. We're going to share this because it's a scary one. Can you sit with us and know it? And I didn't flinch. I was there with him, and we all hugged each other afterwards, and we developed a plan to help him. And it's that kind of care, and I'll tell you that that was just one example of many, is because we started listening, and because we imagined our church as larger than our physical space. So, I was reminded about this concept of love and how we fall in love. You all have love stories and how it happened. And as we're imagining falling in love with our neighborhood, the first thing you need to do is understand yourself and know how to love. You can't say, I'm going to go and find love. It never works. You have to step back and say, I'm going to be a person that shares love. And when you listen, you are allowing for love to emanate from yourself. And so I think if you are looking for love, you will not find it. If you give love, love will come back to you. And that's how Jesus' ministry worked. And that's how churches should work. To love your neighborhood means that you understand them where they are and that you are vulnerable where you are. A friend of mine, Eric Law, has anybody read the Eric Law's books?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's fantastic. He has this concept called grace margins. Does anybody know the grace margin concept? Anybody have? Okay. This is something that I will talk to the clergy in the group. We oftentimes bemoan the wedding, the funeral, the baptism of a person in the neighborhood that does not come back again, right? And Eric Law gives us the reminder that that is a grace margin. And in our culture, those are ever shrinking. Our ability to be a culturally relevant space in any point of transition in people's lives. And so we should hold on to those baptisms and those weddings with both hands and find a way to bring our community into discussion about how to love those people in that shift. I'll tell you a story. This is a heartbreaking one. At Trinity in the Woods, we had a couple and a mother that were experiencing homelessness. They lived in their car. And they began to come to the church. And it was a real challenge for the church because they were strong personalities. And the church was taken aback by this new sort of energy in their space. But they did a really good job. I was proud of them. And they started coming with some regularity and decided that they wanted me to marry the couple. They were maybe 22. I can't remember how old they were. They were young. And the couple was non-traditional in every sense of the word. They just were very interesting. And the wedding was being planned, and they were excited about bringing their family. And I learned actually the day of the wedding that the groom's sister despised the bride. And she was really smart in what she did. The groom's sister called all of the people for the wedding and told them that the wedding was the next week. So no one showed up for the wedding, except for a few people from work that the sister didn't know about. There's about 8 people in the congregation, and they had slaved over food for 2 days, making food for everyone. My congregation came around them and loved them. My congregation became the maid of honor and the groomsmen. My congregation walked them down the aisle. My congregation loved them in a way that I think transformed how they looked at how they interacted with the world around them. It was, I think, one of those, I don't know if they point to it, but for me it was a watershed moment for them to understand what it means to be church. And they sat with them as they cried, they handed them Kleenex, and they loved them in the middle of this tragedy that was supposed to be the happiest day of their lives. This is the kind of church we want. A church that embraces the ministry that we're doing and understands, especially if leaders are planting that mission and they're saying, I wonder if the community will come around. That's how you have a transformational church. And that's how you use those grace margins well. So I think this might be a good time to stop. It keeps us relatively on the same time frame. Does this feel good? And hopefully it'll give us a spark to talk more later on about the next stuff. Okay? All right. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate you all. We're gonna record this last portion, so I'll just be standing up here, even though it seems odd to be standing funny, just so it can be on the recording. And we'll make it through this last little bit, and then we'll have a conversation. Does that sound good? Sure. So the last step is facilitating, and this is the difficult step of not making it about you. I think one of the impulses we have initially is to say, how can we create a program to accomplish this? And really my first step always was, in other churches, was I think I have a good idea. Let me see if I can implement that. And it just doesn't work as well as just stepping back and letting ideas come and grow out of the community. It's not nearly as effective. So if you try to grow your church, you will fail. Just like that sense of falling in love. If you try to seek out the love, it's not going to come to you. If you try to be the love, then it will show up and it will grow and it will take root. 2 Corinthians 8:8-15. I do not say this as a command, but I am testing the genuineness of your love against the earnestness of others. For you know the generous act of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. And in this matter, I am giving my advice. It is appropriate for you who began last year not only to do something, but even to desire to do something, now finishing doing it, so that your eagerness may be matched by completing it according to your means. If the eagerness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. I do not mean that there should be a relief for others and pressure on you, but it is a question of a fair balance between your present abundance and their need, so that their abundance may be for your need, in order that there may be a fair balance. As it is written, the one who had much did not have too much, and the one who had little did not have too little. How do we create, and not just with physical resources, but with time and energy and purpose and identity, so that people that are outside of our church might feel like they have ownership of it with us? That's the hardest part, is to give it away. What Jesus has given us, we constantly have to give away, and that just doesn't mean stewardship of our financial resources. It's about the actual ownership of the church. A good example of this is a friend of mine is a pastor in the Chicagoland area, and he noticed that there was a need for Hispanic ministry, and it was becoming evident that there was a desert for that area, and there were all these Hispanic grocery stores. There was a huge growing population of people from both Mexico and from other Spanish-speaking countries. And he, instead of trying to do it himself, he found a leader and gave the leader the keys and said, go ahead. Suddenly that church boomed and was bigger within a year than his worshiping congregation. And it scared everybody to death. This happened to a friend of mine in Detroit to different results too. It scared everybody to death because they were taking over our church. If you don't have generosity of heart and experience and the joy that comes from that kind of transformation, then you will be reductive and you will hold on to your resources and it will never grow. God notices that change happens in a community and God wants us to live into that change. My friend in Chicago lived into that change and his church grew too. So it wasn't about resisting the movement, but it was about seeing how transition can happen. So,
Corinthians 2, would you please repeat
sorry,
that?
Corinthians 2:8, 2 Corinthians 8 through 15.
Thank you.
And whimsically, for this section, there is a song, but I'll sing it to you. One of the things about our worshiping community is that we don't limit ourselves to only worship songs. We pick things from popular culture, and it really doesn't matter what generation it is, stuff from last year and stuff from the 80s and the 60s and whatever. And so that's just always the first song that comes to my head. This one's a Supertramp song. It's the song, give a little bit of your love to me. Give a little bit, I'll give a little bit of my love to you. There's so much that we need to share, so send a smile and show you care. I'll give a little bit of my life for you. So give a little bit of your time to me. See the man with the lonely eyes, oh take his hand, you'll be surprised. That to me feels like church. Noticing who needs love and noticing that it's you too, and you'll be transformed. So this is how we did it at Church on the Square. A woman came into our building, this was before we even started worshiping, and she said, I've been talking to churches around the neighborhood and nobody will welcome me in to do a program for young children. She said, I've got a whole bunch of moms that want to do, not even a drop-in, just to come in with our kids and have a play group. And I drive out all the way out to a different neighborhood, like 25 minutes away to do a play group, and I really want one that's here. And I said, sure, okay. And she said, really? Like, you just gonna say, sure, you don't know who I am? I said, I don't care who you are. Like, yes, this is your church, it's not my church, let's make it happen. And that church, that program, Tots at Cots, has lasted longer than any of the programs that we've had. The very first time we did it, we had, I think, 60 children. And so we had to give them like a square foot of place to play. And since then, we've gotten it down to like maybe like manageable 40 kids, 30 to 40 kids. And every week, we have 30 to 40 kids and we sing together and we do games and we do crafts. But it's mostly about the fact that I'm building a relationship with all the mothers and all the caregivers that are in the neighborhood. So I know the nannies, I know the moms, and I know the families. And so when I'm in like pushing my cart in the grocery store, I say hello to children that their parents don't know me yet. And they know who I am and give me a hug. They're like, who is the stranger that you are hugging? But for the most part, their nannies have taken a picture of me singing the Tots at Cots theme song and things like that. So we've written a lot of songs for this group too. And this is a thing that I did in my previous church too. We had this growing community of small kids and we invited in parents and we wrote songs for them and did little dances and skits and it was fantastic. But it wasn't me that started it. It was always somebody else that brought the energy. And I just met that energy with sort of the catalytic converting of energy into purpose. Another example of this would be this using our building for community conversations. People would come in often and say, I have a passion for, one of them was a public safety fair. You know, we don't have one around here. I'd like to know how to like set up cameras around my house. Maybe we could have somebody teach us Taekwondo. And I thought, well, this doesn't feel like it's mission forward. So I took that idea, I said yes, but then I also brought in a young man who is part of a program called Prison to PhD. And he talked about how we should ban the box on forms that says that you went to prison so you can't get a job. and he talked about giving a face and a voice to people that have been inside. And it's changed the whole conversation of public safety from not just about us versus them, but we are trying to develop a public safety dynamic that's different. So we not only invited the police to come and talk, but we also invited other organizations to come and talk about how it's justice focused. And then from that conversation, we developed a group called Southeast Baltimore Responding to Racism, and we had all these conversations about racism in our neighborhood. And just now, new leaders are coming up, and they've taken me out for coffee and said, we'd like to start this up again. So everything has an ebb and flow too. If you're the only one showing up as the leader, you should realize that needs to take a break. Put it on the shelf for a minute. And so I try to make things be short periods of time, maybe 6 weeks if it's a Bible study or if it's a small group. And then I'll say, the next time you're interested, I'm ready to do it. So I become the person that helps their energy turn it into action. So this is there's a problem with this, and it's the same kind of problem that I talked about with the cathedral. And this is the thing that we're working on right now, is it's weaving together these disparate concepts. And so as we're growing our core community, I'm finding ways to assign individuals from that community to be the liaison to these different projects. And so what happens then is that the people that are involved in that become more engaged in that community. They become an emissary from our community. It's not just me. So it's not I'm the hub and there's spokes coming out of it, but there's many hubs that are beginning to take ownership. The second year of Church in the Square, we thought we should get together and have a church council, vestry. And we called it a board, brought people together. I think we had 7 people on the board. It was a huge failure, massive failure. In fact, some of the people on the board no longer worship with us because it was such an unimpressive endeavor from their opinion. Instead, our new treasurer said, why don't we just write down how we're operating, because we're operating well, and empower the people that are leaders in those roles already, and say, you are now in charge of the meditation group. You are now in charge of welcome. You are now in charge of the kitchen, because they already are. And so we just give them a title and say, you're doing a great job. And so every year now we're having, once a quarter we're having meetings of leaders, but every year we're like reassigning and saying, how do we operate? And if that shifts, we're not going to keep on a person that's in charge of something that no longer exists. We just embolden and empower the people that are there to give them energy. Yeah.
Are you able to do that because you have such an overall view on everything that's going on and you kind of have your fingers in all the pies?
I think you need someone that knows everything that's going on. That's exactly right. And I worry sometimes about the central reality of that for me. But as much as I can give them away, here's an example. 2 weeks ago, we had our first retreat as a community. I was informed that we were having a retreat by one of my members. They had already done the planning for it. They booked it, and they told us when it was going to happen, and I just told people. And so as long as I can give people the ownership, I told that person, you're welcome to make a retreat whenever you want to. And he said, I did. Here's when it is. Invite people. And we got 15 people to show up for a retreat. And that, I hope, is the beginning of our next stage as a community, which is decentralizing some of that energy. So I don't need to know everything. That was a worry that I had about the middle of last year. So basically, the end of the conversation is what we got back. From doing this, we decentralized who owns our church. Oftentimes, I will walk into a church and not know what a program is that's happening because Laura, my assistant, has programmed something and it's just there. But I'll know most of the people that are there because I know the community. So I'll walk in and I'll say hello to people. I'll hug all the kids, and they'll say, "What do you think about this?" Or "Is it okay if we stay later?" And I said, "This is your church. It's not my church." And in the fall, we're finally starting a Sunday morning worship service. We only worship on Saturdays at 4 right now. And I'm excited to see what's going to happen because we're building a team that's going to start this church service that is organically from the people in the neighborhood that want it. It's not that I'm doing something that has to happen, it's that they want to have a Sunday morning worship service. So keep an eye on what we're doing, but this is how we're doing right now. Thanks.
When did you start this process?
3.5 years ago. Oh, well, the process was 4 years ago. So we didn't worship for half half a year. For 6 months, we just listened.
The three of you, John, and you.
John. So, thank you. I think that's done with the recording part. Let's have a conversation.
Okay.